I was sitting in a coffee shop in Shenzhen last week, watching the construction site across the street. Usually, these places are a hive of noise. The constant clanging of steel, the dust of cement, the frantic energy of a city growing by the second. But this time, it was eerily quiet. Just a skeleton of a building, half finished and abandoned, wrapped in fading green netting. Yet, inside the coffee shop, the atmosphere was completely different. It was packed. People were scrolling on their phones, ordering $6 lattes, and excitedly planning their next weekend trip to Thailand or Japan. If you only looked at the crowd, you'd think the economy was thriving. But if you looked out the window at that silent crane, you'd think the world was ending. The common narrative we hear is that the Chinese consumer is broken, that they're too scared to spend and are burying their cash under the mattress. But when you look at the actual flow of funds, something much stranger is happening. It's not that the money has vanished. It's that the giant invisible engine that powered China for 30 years, the act of buying an apartment, has suddenly seized up. For decades, saving in China wasn't just a digital number in a bank, it was a physical act. When a family saved, they bought a home, which triggered a massive chain reaction that kept steel mills burning, glass factories running, and furniture designers busy. Today, that money is still there, but it's moving into bank deposits and experience spending dinners, movies, and travel. On the surface, it looks like a simple lifestyle shift. But beneath the surface, it's creating a terrifying structural void. We are witnessing a demand vacuum that no amount of tourism or latte buying could ever fill. As the state doubles down on building a high-tech industrial superpower, its own people are moving in the opposite direction. It raises a question that no one seems ready to answer. What happens to the world's factory when its own people stop buying the very things it was built to produce?
It is the defining economic puzzle of our time, isn't it? That visual you just painted, the dead crane versus the busy barista, that is the disconnect we are going to tear apart today.
And it feels like a genuine contradiction. You read the headlines and it's all doom and gloom about deflation or slow growth. But then you walk into a mall in Shanghai or a coffee shop in Shenzhen and it's bustling. We're here to bridge that gap.
We are.
We have a massive stack of documents today, policy briefs directly from the People's Bank of China, really technical analyses of the upcoming 15th five-year plan, some frankly alarming studies on local bank risk, and some dense frameworks on consumption tax reform.
The mission here is to go beyond the headlines. We aren't just talking about slow growth. We are talking about a fundamental rewiring of the operating system of the world's second largest economy. We are looking at a machine that is, swapping out its engine while moving down the highway.
Right, because the old engine is dead. That high velocity multiplier where you buy a house and it ripples through the whole supply chain, that's gone.
Seized up. And the new engine, high-tech manufacturing, EVs, AI is being built at breakneck speed, but it's not fully online yet. We are living in the gap, the dangerously quiet gap between the two.
So to navigate this gap, we've broken this deep dive into three specific lenses. We're going to look at the money, the monetary policy. We're going to look at the industry. What are they actually building? And we're going to look at fiscal reality. How do local governments survive this?
Blood, muscle, and bone.
Exactly. Let's start with the blood, the money, because the data shows the money is there. It's physically in the system, but it's acting weird. It's like it's frozen.
It has stopped moving. And to understand the human cost of that stagnation, we have a story that really anchors this abstract concept.
I heard a story recently about a middle-aged mechanical engineer in Shenyang named Mr. Liu. For 20 years, Liu's career was a mirror of the real estate multiplier. He designed the specialized heavy machinery that processed the steel and cement, fueling the skyline's expansion. In his mind, his savings were always destined for a second apartment in the suburbs, a tangible store of value that he believed kept the gears of the nation turning. But today, the construction sites are quiet, and Liu finds himself staring at a bank balance that is growing in numbers but dying in velocity. He moved his life savings into a 3-year fixed deposit, a safe harbor that feels more like a stagnant pool. He told a friend that it feels as though the blood has stopped pumping through the economy's veins. His money sits in a digital vault while the factory floor where he spent his youth grows dusty. As a journalist covering global markets, I look at Liu's situation and see the human face of the balance sheet recession. It is heartbreaking to see a lifetime of industriousness trapped in a structural void. We often talk about M2 liquidity, but for Liu, it's about the loss of a bridge. The property sector wasn't just a place to live. It was the engine that translated his hard-earned savings into the physical world. Now the bridge is broken, his capital is idle, and the challenge for the next decade isn't just reform. It's about finding a new way to make Liu feel that his savings are building the future again. rather than just hiding from it.
Growing in numbers, but dying in velocity. That is such a crucial distinction. We need to pause there because that is the technical definition of a liquidity trap.
Okay, so break this down. I see M1 and M2 discussed in the financial press constantly. Usually when money supply goes up, the economy heats up. Why isn't that happening for Mr. Luce?
Think of M2 as the entire reservoir of water in a dam. It includes everything, cash, checking accounts, but also those savings deposits and time deposits like Mr. Luce 3-year CD.
So all the potential money.
All of it. And M2 is high. The reservoir is full. In fact, household savings in China are at record highs. But M1 is the water actually flowing through the pipes into the city. It's the cash in circulation. It's the money in corporate demand deposits, money that's ready to be spent right now.
So we have a full reservoir, but empty pipes. A trickle coming out of the tap.
Exactly. We are seeing a historic divergence. M2 is growing because people are hoarding cash in savings accounts. They're scared. M1 is sluggish because they aren't spending it and companies aren't using it for productive investment or business expansion. The money is trapped. It is sitting there accumulating a little bit of interest, but it's doing no work for the real economy. It's dead money.
And the central bank, the PBOC, they see this. I was reading in the notes that they are actually changing the definition of M1 starting in January 2025.
Yeah.
That seems significant. Is it just accounting tricks, or does it mean something deeper?
It's not just an accounting trick, no. It's actually a pretty big move towards transparency and, I would say, modernizing their toolkit. They're going to start including residential demand deposits, basically household checking accounts, into the M1 calculation.
Which they weren't doing before. Why not?
Previously, M1 in China was very corporate-focused. It was designed to measure the liquidity of the business sector. Households were seen more as savers, not spenders, in that old model.
So what's the significance of adding them in now?
It's the PBOC officially acknowledging that household savings are liquid. Mr. Liu could spend that money tomorrow if he wanted to. It's not locked away in a vault for 10 years. By counting it in M1, the PBOC is admitting this is potential energy. It's sitting right there on the starting line. It should be moving. It's a way of measuring just how much fuel is sitting in the tank, completely unused.
So they're getting a more accurate dashboard, a better reading of the problem.
A much better reading. It tells us the central bank is trying to get a clearer picture of this massive pool of dormant purchasing power. They're saying the problem isn't a lack of money. The problem is a lack of motion.
So if the fuel is there, why isn't the engine starting? I mean, the standard playbook for a central bank is just to cut interest rates, right? You make borrowing cheap. People like Mr. Liu borrow to buy a house. Businesses borrow to build a factory. Boom, economy starts.
And that's the transmission mechanism. And according to the analysis from BNP Paribas we looked at, that mechanism is currently impaired.
Impaired sounds polite. It sounds broken.
It is effectively broken. This is what the economist Richard Koo famously called a balance sheet recession. When the main asset on your personal balance sheet, your house, drops in value, you feel poorer, even if your salary is the same. So even if interest rates are zero, you are not going to borrow more money.
You're going to do the opposite. You're going to pay down your existing debt. You get defensive.
You go into survival mode. You're minimizing debt, not expanding. And it's not just households. Corporations do the exact same thing. They look at the uncertain future and say, let's not build that new factory. Let's pay off our old loans and build a cash buffer.
So the central bank is pushing on a string. They can lower the cost of borrowing, but they can't force Mr. Liu or a corporation to actually take the loan.
And this is where the Chinese approach gets really interesting and diverges from what we saw in the West after 2008. In the US or Europe, when this happens, the response is generally quantitative easing. We just flood the entire financial system with money until something moves. I call it flood irrigation.
Right, helicopter money. Just drop cash from the sky until people finally start spending it on something.
China is refusing to do that. They are deeply concerned about creating another asset bubble, especially in property, or sparking massive inflation down the line. So instead of flood irrigation, they are using precision drip irrigation.
Stick with that analogy. How do you drip feed an economy as massive as China's?
You use what are called structural monetary policy tools. This is fascinating stuff from the Sebastian Guo paper we read. Instead of a blanket rate cut that affects everyone, the PBOC uses the reserve requirement ratio, the RRR, surgically.
And the RRR is just how much cash a bank has to keep in its vault, money it can't lend out.
Correct. A very powerful tool. So the PBOC might go to a small rural commercial bank and say, hey, if you can prove to us that you are increasing your lending to small businesses or farmers, what they call inclusive finance, we will let you keep less money in the vault. It releases cash, but only if that cash goes to a specific, targeted sector.
That's clever. It's an incentive program, not a mandate. It's guiding the flow.
It gets even more specific. They have these re-lending facilities, or to use the official term, special purpose lending facilities, SPLFs. Think of it like a reimbursement scheme from the central bank.
Okay, walk me through that. If I'm a bank, how does it work?
The central bank tells commercial banks, you go lend money to a green energy project first, a solar farm, for example. You, the commercial bank, take the initial risk. Once you show us the signed loan agreement, we will lend you back a portion of that money, say 60% of the principal, at an incredibly low rate like 1.75%.
Wow. So the bank makes a spread. They get super cheap funding from the government, but only after they've funded something the government wants, like a wind farm or a tech startup. They can't just take that cheap money and speculate on half-finished apartment building.
This is the crux of it. They are trying to build a new bridge. The old real estate bridge is broken, so they're trying to build a new one directly from Mr. Liu's savings to the new economy. They have specific lending facilities for clean coal, for sci-tech innovation, for elderly care. It is the state trying to manually direct the flow of blood into the specific muscles they want to grow, rather than just pumping up the whole body and hoping for the best.
It's a much more hands-on interventionist approach than we're used to seeing from Western central banks.
Far more. It reflects a different philosophy about the role of the state in guiding economic outcomes.
But there's a catch, isn't there? The notes mention the impossible trinity. It sounds like a Robert Ludlum novel, but I know it's a fundamental economic constraint.
It is the iron law of international economics. A country wants three things: a stable exchange rate for its currency, control over its own independent monetary policy, so setting its own interest rates, and the ability for capital to move freely in and out of the country.
Right. A stable currency, control over your economy, and open markets. Sounds good.
But you can only ever have two of those three. That's the trinity. You must sacrifice one. For decades, China sacrificed free capital flow to maintain the other two.
And now they're trying to have all three.
Well, they're trying to manage a transition where they are gradually opening the capital account. They want that free flow of capital, but that creates this incredible tension. It's a conflict. If they cut domestic interest rates too much to help Mr. Liu and the local economy, what happens?
ME flows out. Capital flees the country, seeking higher returns in the U.S. or Europe, where rates are higher, and the yuan crashes.
And if they raise interest rates to defend the currency, they crush the domestic economy.
So they are handcuffed.
They are walking the narrowest of tightropes. That's why you see them using this interest rate corridor system. They set a floor, the rate on excess reserves, and a ceiling, the rate at the standing lending facility, and they try to keep all the market rates hovering in that narrow band. It's a very delicate game of management. They are trying to stimulate the economy just enough to keep it moving, but not so much that they trigger capital flight and crash the currency.
It sounds exhausting.
Yeah.
And incredibly complex.
It requires constant vigilance and intervention.
So, to wrap up this whole blood section, the money is there. Mr. Liu has it in the bank. But he won't spend it because the old trusted bridge real estate is gone. The government can't just flood the system with cash because of the impossible trinity. So instead, they're trying to use these very surgical, precise tools to build a new bridge, to funnel that idle money into specific high-tech and green energy sectors.
Which leads us perfectly to the next question. If the money is being surgically funneled into high-tech, what exactly are they building?
If we aren't building condos in Shenyang anymore, what are we building? This brings us to the muscle, the industrial pivot.
And this is where the stakes get incredibly high. This isn't just about economics, it's about the entire direction of the nation, as laid out in the upcoming 15th five-year plan.
We have a story from the front lines of this pivot that really brings it to life.
Let's hear it.
I saw a post on a social media forum from a young woman named Xiao Chen, a systems integrator for a high-tech manufacturing firm in the Yangtze River Delta. Her story represents the pivot point of the upcoming 15th five-year plan. For years, her company's biggest clients were firms tied to urban expansion. They sold systems that automated parts of, say, window frame manufacturing or cement processing. Now, her team is being told to pivot or perish. They're trying to integrate AI-driven automation into factories that produce high-end medical devices and green energy components, the new three sectors. Chen writes about the uncanny silence of the transition. She sees the logic of the state. If people aren't buying apartments, the state must ensure they are buying the advanced outputs of a new industrial era. Yet she feels the weight of the export reliance. She wonders if her fellow citizens will ever develop a taste for these high-tech goods fast enough to replace the voracious appetite the old property market once had for simple steel. Looking at Chen's narrative, I feel a sense of profound tension. We're witnessing an attempt to re-engineer the soul of an economy. The goal is to replace the crude multiplier of real estate with the refined demand of advanced manufacturing. While the ambition is breathtaking, the human cost is the uncertainty Chen feels every Monday morning. It's a gamble on whether a nation can transition from building hardware for the land to software for the spirit. And I find myself rooting for her, even while acknowledging the immense difficulty of replacing such a massive historical engine of growth.
Pivot or perish. That phrase just captures the anxiety perfectly. The UBP source we analyze calls this the unfinished pivot, and it's unfinished because it's happening right now, in real time, in Xiao Chen's company.
And we need to clarify what they are pivoting to. We used to hear about Made in China 2025. Is this the same thing, just with a new name?
I would say it's an evolution and an acceleration. Made in China 2025 was largely about self-sufficiency. It was about security, making sure China didn't need to buy critical components like semiconductors or passenger jets from the West. It was a defensive strategy, in a way.
It's catching up.
Exactly. The 15th five-year plan, from all the drafts and analyses we're seeing, is much more aggressive. It's about achieving global leadership. The goal isn't just catching up anymore. It's about defining the global frontier in AI, quantum computing, biotechnology, and of course, the new three.
The new three being electric vehicles, lithium batteries, and solar cells.
Correct. These are designated as the pillars of the new industrial base. But here is the massive, massive problem that Xiao Chen identified so perfectly in her post. It's what I call the service-industrial mismatch.
Unpack that for me. It sounds critical.
Okay, go back to your opening story, the coffee shop in Shenzhen. What were those people spending their money on?
Lattes, weekend trips to Japan, dinners out, services, experiences.
Exactly. The modern Chinese consumer, especially the urban middle class, is moving towards a service-based consumption pattern. They want experiences. They want better healthcare for their parents, better education for their kids, more interesting travel. But the Chinese state, the industrial policy, it is pouring trillions of yuan into manufacturing capacity. They're building factories to make things, EVs, solar panels, batteries.
I see the disconnect. The consumer wants to do things, but the state is building more things.
And there's a crucial economic difference. You can't export a trip to Thailand. You can't export a haircut or a yoga class, but you can export an electric vehicle.
Bingo. So if the domestic consumer wants services, but the factories are churning out goods, who buys the goods?
Foreigners.
The export market.
The export market. And that is precisely why we are seeing global trade tensions spike so dramatically. The US and the EU are looking at this massive, and I mean massive, wave of Chinese EVs and solar panels heading their way and saying, whoa, you are flooding our markets with subsidized goods because your own people aren't buying this stuff fast enough to absorb the capacity you've built.
This is what they call overcapacity, a word we're going to hear a lot more of.
And it makes China incredibly vulnerable to tariffs and trade barriers. If the West decides to close the door on Chinese EVs, where does Xiao Chen's factory send those medical devices or car components? This is a huge strategic vulnerability.
So the government must be aware of this. What's the plan?
The plan has a name. It's the dual circulation strategy.
I hear this buzzword all the time. Did you break it down in plain English?
It's a fancy way of saying we need to stand on two legs, not one. For the last 30 years, China stood very heavily on one leg, external circulation. That is, producing for the world, being the world's factory.
The export-led growth model.
The most successful in history. The new strategy, dual circulation, is about beefing up the other leg, internal circulation. That means creating a robust, self-sustaining domestic market where Chinese people buy Chinese goods. The goal is to make the internal leg so strong that they don't fall over if the external leg gets kicked out from under them by tariffs or geopolitical tensions.
But as we established with Mr. Liu, that internal leg is a bit wobbly right now. People are saving, not spending.
It's very wobbly, and that creates this incredibly intense pressure cooker environment for companies like Xiao Chen's. The term used in the sources, and it's a term you hear all over China now, is involution.
Naiwan. It's become a cultural phenomenon, not just an economic one. It means like pointless internal competition, right?
It basically means competition that doesn't create new value. It just grinds everyone down in a race to the bottom. Because the government is subsidizing these new three sectors so heavily, everyone rushed in. You now have hundreds of EV makers, countless battery plants. They all start vicious price wars to gain market share.
Which sounds great for the consumer. You get a cheap EV, but it must be terrible for the companies themselves.
It destroys profit margins. If Xiaoqin's company has to slash the price of its automation systems by 40% just to sell its inventory and compete, they can't afford to invest in next-generation R&D. They can't afford to give Xiaoqin a higher salary. And if she doesn't get a raise, she doesn't buy that $6 latte or that new EV. It becomes a deflationary spiral.
So is the government just letting this happen, a sort of chaotic survival of the fittest?
Not anymore. The notes mention new anti-monopoly enforcement, but it's being used in a very interesting way. It's being focused on stopping destructive competition. They are stepping in to manage capacity and discourage these brutal price wars.
They're trying to protect profits.
They're trying to protect the industry's health. The goal is to cultivate a handful of national champions, globally competitive giants, rather than a chaotic free-for-all where everyone bleeds out. It's a much more curated, managed form of competition.
It's a fascinating high-stakes gamble. They are betting that they can upgrade the entire industrial base and create a domestic market for its output before the trade wars cut them off at the knees.
And before the internal employment pressure from the property bust gets too high. But there is one more critical player in this drama. We've looked at the saver, Mr. Liu, and the worker, Xiaoqin, but someone has to keep the lights on and the roads paved.
The local government. The bone structure of the economy.
And frankly, this might be the most acute and dangerous part of the entire deep dive, because if the local governments go broke, none of the rest of this matters.
We have a story about a local official that really sheds light on this intense pressure.
Let's go to Director Wang.
There's a story circulating about a local township official in a mountainous province, let's call him Director Wang, who is struggling with the post-land reality. For a decade, Wang was a land financier. His budget for local schools and elderly care was essentially a commission from selling plots of land to developers. Now the developers are gone. I read a transcript of his speech to a local committee where he talked about the agony of the shift. He is tasked with implementing new municipal financing tools, trying to find a sustainable revenue stream that doesn't involve a bulldozer. He spoke of the invisible infrastructure, the need to tax services and create value from existing assets rather than just selling the ground beneath their feet. He described it as learning to walk again after the crutches of land sales revenue were kicked away. Watching Director Wang struggle through a political lens, it's easy to be cynical about local government debt, but when you hear him talk about keeping the lights on at a rural clinic, the perspective shifts. This fiscal decentralization isn't just a policy debate, it's a survival strategy for the grassroots. While some might view these shifts with skepticism regarding the state's role, we have to recognize the desperate necessity of creating a non-land dependent base. It is a messy, painful divorce from a decades-long addiction to property, and though the transition is fraught with risk, the alternative, a collapse of public services, is a human cost that no society should have to pay.
The agony of the shift. Director Wang is staring down what economists call a gray rhino.
A gray rhino. That's a threat that is huge, obvious, highly probable, but everyone just kind of ignores it until it charges you.
Exactly. And the rhino that's been lumbering towards China for a decade is the inevitable collapse of the land finance model. For any listener who doesn't follow Chinese municipal finance closely, you have to understand this one thing. For 20 years, local governments didn't really run on taxes in the way we think of them. They ran on land sales.
They were basically real estate developers with a flag on their office building.
That's not an unfair characterization. Up to 40% of their total revenue, and in some cases even more, came from leasing vast tracts of land to property developers. But now, with the property market in a deep slump, land sales are down something like 44% or more in some regions. The revenue has just evaporated.
Director Wang's expenses haven't gone down. He still has to pay the teachers, pave the roads, run the local clinic.
They've actually gone up, with healthcare and pension costs rising. And this is where the math becomes terrifying. The report we have shows that local governments are responsible for about 86% of all public spending in China. 86%. But they only receive about 45% of the total national tax revenue.
That's a massive structural deficit, a fiscal mismatch.
Yeah.
In the past, They plugged that hole with land money. Now the hole is wide open and getting wider.
It's a gaping chasm.
So what do? They can't just stop paying police officers. They borrow.
They borrow. And this brings us to that CUHK study on local commercial banks. This is where the contagion risk, the systemic risk for the whole financial system really lives.
Okay, connect the dots for me. How does a struggling township's budget problem threaten the whole banking system?
Okay. Director Wang needs money fast. He can't get it from the central government easily. So he goes to the local bank, a small regional commercial bank in his city or province. He pressures them, either directly or indirectly, to lend money to his local government financing vehicle, or LGFV. These are these murky, off-balance sheet companies that governments use to build infrastructure.
And the bank can't really say no to the local government.
It's very, very difficult. So the bank's loan book gets loaded up with this local government debt. The study says local banks hold about 75% of this stuff. But here is the policy paradox. The central government in Beijing is telling Director Wang, you need to pay down your debt, you must deleverage. So what does he do to make his interest payments on old loans?
He goes back to the same local bank and borrows more money to pay off the interest on the old loans.
It's a process called evergreening the debt. But the real victim here is the local private economy. Economists call this crowding out. If the local bank has lent all its available capital to Director Wang just to keep the government floating and paying its bills, who doesn't get a loan?
The local bakery that wants to buy a new oven? The tech startup that needs seed funding? Mr. Liu, if he ever wanted to start a small business.
Exactly. The productive private sector is starved of capital because the public sector is sucking all the oxygen out of the room. The CUHK source explicitly says this weakens the regional economy and increases the risk of non-performing loans down the line. It's a vicious, self-defeating cycle.
So if they can't sell land anymore and they can't keep borrowing forever, they need a new business model. Director Wang mentioned invisible infrastructure. What on earth is that?
It's the fiscal revolution, and the main proposal on the table, this is from the China policy source, is a complete game changer. It's consumption tax reform.
A tax reform. How does that fix a problem this big?
Because it completely realigns incentives. Right now, most consumption taxes on things like cigarettes, cars, alcohol, gasoline are collected at the production stage, at the factory gate. That revenue goes mostly to the central government.
Okay, so if you have a big car factory in your province, that's good for jobs. But the tax on the cars sold doesn't really help Director Wang's budget.
Correct. The reform proposes moving the point of tax collection from the factory to the retail or wholesale stage, the shop where you actually buy the car.
Right.
And this is the absolute key, giving that revenue directly to the local government where the sale happened.
Whoa. That flips the entire incentive structure on its head.
Completely. Right now, Director Wang's main incentive is to get a factory built, to pour concrete. That brings prestige, construction jobs, maybe some business tax. But if this reform passes, he will suddenly have a massive incentive to encourage shoppers. He will want vibrant retail districts, busy shopping malls, car dealerships. He'll want people buying cars and cigarettes and jewelry in his town.
It turns the local official from a construction manager into a mall manager, a community manager.
It aligns the local government's financial incentives with the new engine of consumption. If they want revenue, they have to foster a thriving local service and retail economy. It's a powerful tool to get them to stop thinking about bulldozers and start thinking about baristas.
It's brilliant in theory, but there have to be losers in this, right? If you move the tax revenue from the factory to the store.
Oh, the production provinces are very wary of this. Think of provinces that have huge tobacco industries like Yunnan or are major car producers like Hubei. They stand to lose a significant tax base. The consumption provinces, the wealthy coastal regions like Guangdong or major cities like Beijing and Shanghai, they win big because that's where people with money spend it.
So the central government will have to step in with huge transfer payments to smooth it all out and prevent provinces from going bankrupt.
Yes. It's politically very difficult and messy to implement. But structurally, it may be the only way to wean local governments off the drug of land finance. They have to move their economic base from a model based on expansion building things to a model based on activity consuming things.
It's just incredible how tightly connected all of this is. We started with Mr. Liu's personal savings account. We went through Xiao Shen's high-tech factory, and we ended up in Director Wang's dusty budget office.
It's a single, interconnected ecosystem. You can't fix the monetary policy without addressing the industrial policy, and you can't fix either of them if the fiscal foundation is crumbling.
If Director Wang's budget depends on people shopping, he desperately needs Mr. Liu to feel confident enough to open his wallet. And he desperately needs Xiao Chen to have a secure, well-paying job so she can be one of those shoppers.
The three stories are one story.
So let's try to synthesize this entire deep dive. We are looking at an unfinished pivot. The blueprint is clear. They know they need to move capital from real estate to tech. That's the monetary pillar. They know they need to move from low-end manufacturing to high-value tech, and the new three, that's the industrial pillar. And they know they need to move their government funding model from land sales to consumption tax. That's the fiscal pillar.
But knowing the path and actually walking it are two very different things. The execution is everything.
It brings me back to that word you mentioned earlier and the core of the problem, confidence.
That is the demand vacuum you described at the very beginning.
Yeah.
We have seen today that the state is incredibly good at building supply. They have an unparalleled ability to build capacity. They can build the factory. They can build the high-speed rail. They can write the tax code. But can they build confidence?
Can they make Mr. Liu believe that the future will be better than the past?
That is the trillion-dollar question. The ultimate success of the 15th five-year plan doesn't rely on whether the interest rate is 1.75% or 1.5%. It relies on whether Mr. Liu feels safe enough to take his money out of that dead 3-year fixed deposit and spend it or invest it. It relies on whether Xiao Chen feels her job is secure enough to innovate and plan for the future. And it relies on whether Director Wang can find value and purpose in serving a population that consumes, rather than just ruling over a territory that develops.
It's almost like they are trying to re-engineer the soul of the economy. We are watching a deliberate shift from a hardware economy, one built on steel, cement, land, to a software economy, one built on confidence, innovation, and service.
That is a beautiful way to put it. A transition from hardware to software. And as anyone in the tech world knows, hardware is hard to build, but software is where the bugs are the hardest to find and where the user experience is absolutely everything. If the user, the citizen, isn't happy, if they don't trust the system, the whole thing crashes.
We are watching a massive, real-time experiment in economic re-engineering on a scale the world has never seen before. And we'll be watching very closely to see if they can pull it off.
Indeed. It will be the defining economic story of the next decade.
Until the next deep dive.